So let me share my screen here. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about NPS Plus. Um, we've talked about advancing research throughout this discussion, and NPS Plus is no different. Certainly, when we think about, I've been involved in customer experience. They tell me to say just over 20 years. Once you hit a certain point, you just don't add a number to the end of the two. So 20 years and counting. And one of the things that I've always been fascinated with is using numbers to drive a business. And I certainly came from an operations background to begin with. I used KPIs, those kinds of numbers to really assess the efficiency of supply chain and processes in companies, both retail and B2B companies. So really, I've worked on it all from the business side. So when I jumped over to research and management, one of the things that really drove me was being able to get numbers into the hands of the right people at the right time. But one of the things that astounded me was how long some of these surveys we were asking our customers to complete. And so it was sort of with that idea that we sort of built out what we call NPS Plus. And I really think there's a lot that we can focus on in terms of NPS, both the good and the bad, that has evolved since 2003, since it was introduced. But one of the things I've always sort of talked about with NPS, and colleague of mine just grabbed onto this quote that I sort of made as a joke because I am a middle child, that passives are the forgotten middle child in the NPS model. It's important to point that out because, it's like we intentionally exclude the passives when we're talking about NPS. Your computation is about your promoters and your detractors. This really, it turned into a way for me to sort of challenge myself to see how we can get more value about what they're providing, but really, when we're talking about why NPS Plus, there was a lot of reasons to really start to look at it. Tim mentioned something earlier that still true in customer experience research. Why aren't we doing shorter surveys? Why aren't we getting more to the point more quickly with our customers? I've certainly been on the other end of the equation where I have said, hey, we already have the customer on the line. Let's just ask them one more question. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to fall into that trap. And then suddenly you're quoting them a 5 to 7 minute survey that's turned into a 45-minute survey. And I have seen those for some customer studies. Particularly if you're talking about a transactional, you want to really get to the quick, shorten it, simplify it, make the customer experience better, shall I say. But really, some of the things that we wanted to get to with also included really removing the sort of the redundant and boring matrix questions. We've sort of tripped that up, put a simple approach, so we can get really to the root cause. What's driving that score? Not a bunch of multicollinearity when you do the analytics on driver analysis and try to do all those regressions, but really find out what stands out for them. And then, as I mentioned before, beyond detractors, passives are at-risk customers in some cases, and so it's trying to understand which ones are more at risk of churn, and that could have an immediate potential financial impact. So what is NPS Plus? Well, I'll show you a sample of it here, and it's just very simple. It's a 3-step process. The user rates it on a scale of 0 to 10, just like they're used to. They get options to support the rating they give. Oftentimes, we're pushed into, if you've certainly in the US, if you buy a new car, you're told that if you don't give me a 10, I will be fired from my job. I will lose my family, and I'll end up destitute, broken on the streets. So we actually give visual cues that help the customer understand what's good, what's not so good, and we can level set that based with language, or we can actually even remove it as well. So once they choose the score, we push them right to a root cause before they get to the open-ended question, because we'll have a predefined set of things that we think we can drill down on, understand, or measure, or even have the ability to change within the location, within the branch where it's happening. So then it's go on to their additional comments on that, so we can gather more. And then once they enter the comment, really something inspired by Dan and his team when it comes to communities, being able to let customers look at other comments and say, hey, that's a pretty good idea. And they can vote on other comments, sort of bringing ideation and continuous discovery into the system, customer co-creation, as we might call it. So it's a smooth user experience across all devices, mobile, tablet, and desktop. But really, it's all about shortening and making it easier for the respondent to give us their feedback. So a quick look at the editor. As I mentioned, standard question there. You can have these informative texts on the hover, so that if they're hovering over 0 to 6, and I'll show you the example here in a moment, it will say, no, this is, I was not happy with this experience. The passives that are 7 to 8, it says, not so sure, maybe not. And of course, 9 to 10, hey, I was happy with that experience. So it's really defines what they're rating you, and it gives that visual cue to the feedback. And then as soon as you get through that part, setting it up, what went wrong, where can we improve, those are the root causes for things that are not a good score or even an okay score. And then what went well, so we can differentiate the things that are really going well. And these options, they could be 5 options, they could be 10 options, and you can even include an other in there if you needed to. And then finally, as I mentioned, the open-end comment, you have the ability to turn on voting, so the customers can look at other comments and say, hey, that's a really good idea, and really bring things forward, so that you can say, oh, well, this is something that my company can do that would improve the experience, and others can vote on that and say, yeah, it's something that would make a difference for me. So let me jump real quick into the experience, so you see that. Once we've set this all up, this fictitious credit union here, we're able to launch the question. As I mentioned, as you hover over this text right here below the question updates, so won't recommend, maybe, and then absolutely, I'm completely satisfied. So you're able to select something there. As soon as they select it, how can we improve? And then you have a preset list. You can even include others. So if it was something parking lot, then they can include it in there. And then, of course, give us one idea to change the game. I'm going to just go with the parking lot. And then once I've submitted, it gives me 5 votes to take on and say, hey, here are some things that would really make a difference in how you could serve me as your customer. And these are other ideas generated by other customers. So I could apply 3 votes to this, for example, and I could apply 2 votes to this one, and then I'm done. And guess what? The survey is complete. It's quick, it's easy. It really gets at the heart of what you want to do with a survey, without, monumentally trying to include everything that you could possibly ask. It really brings it down to the original NPS Plus promise that was there in 2003 when Reichheld first launched it. And so, it gives you a lot more information than you expect with such a small question. So adding the reporting widget is very easy. There's an NPS Plus reporting widget. You'll have screens that have overall NPS and trends. You'll be able to look at the root cause here, both for promoters as well as the passives and detractors, so you can see what needs improvement. There is also an option to trend those, so you can look at them across time and not just be fixed on one time period, but also look and say, hey, as we've improved one thing, something else has gotten worse. So let's make sure that we're focusing on the complete game of improving the customer experience. And then, of course, being able to drill down within the passives and detractors and see which ones were which within each category. So gives you a lot of detail within there. And then once you've drilled down into it, actually get back to the individual responses, which comes back to sort of being able to link that back to closed loop feedback. Some things that you can take away from here is being able to click on a response because you see that, hey, this is a passive, but they really were unhappy with something that our detractors are unhappy with. Being able to create a ticket in the closed loop feedback to be able to respond to it. So really getting into a lot of detail, pulling up the individual customers, seeing who they are, and finding out the ideas that they may have generated. And then, of course, what we like to talk about, what we call churn risk, is being able to look at all those factors that create usually there's a lot more passives, and that's why the forgotten middle child anecdote is pretty important, because there's usually a lot of passives in there. And being able to find out the things that detractors didn't like, that passives are also saying they didn't like, and then being able to assign them to a category and say, hey, these might be at risk of churning because they look and feel a lot like our detractors, and putting a number associated with it. And it's easy to then take that number and say, this is, we have these many customers at risk with a lifetime value. There's a financial impact very easily and quickly. So you can really talk about the things and the ideas that really can fix problems and create solutions, both at a local level as well as at a corporate level. And then certainly don't want to leave out the innovation and co-creation here at the bottom, where you can actually see, the comments that have popped up. You can have 5 comments, 10 comments here, but also it has what kind of person left the comment. So you can see with these dots here on the left, if it was a promoter, a passive, or a detractor that left the comment, the number of votes they get, and then also, again, the votes, who did they comes were they from get into a level of detail and actually new processes organization. And then finally, of course, with the innovation and co-creation, you can even break it down further. Look at the comments that promoters had, look at the comments the passives had and the detractors have, really understand their votes and where they're at, and then break it down even further, when the votes, who was voting for it, what percentage, and here you even have the NPS score. So of the person who made that comment. So you can really get into a lot of detail, a lot of trending. You can fix levels of your model threshold, so you know where you want that to bend for your customers. The trending, as I mentioned, how much you want it to trend, and how many ideas that you show in innovation and co-creation. And I'll show you a live screen of that really quick here. And it builds up in such a way that now it's not loading for me, but it builds up in such a way that you're able to get this information. And the goal of this is really making the transactional customer experience survey shorter, keeping with that original promise, removing the redundancy with the boring matrix questions, and then finally being able to look beyond the detractors and identify the at-risks, passives, and understand their risk of churn and the potential financial impact for it.
Awesome.
So with that, I did see a couple of questions come in. I wanted to make sure
There's
I
a
left
good
a little
one
time for that.
that said, can the respondent not see the number of votes already received by other respondents? And also, is it not sorted by the votes? It might influence their vote in a way.
Well, And in some cases, we do want that to happen. We want better ideas to generate upward. We've certainly entertained the idea of randomizing the comments as you see them, but what happens is we also reset the comments periodically. So every month, if you're talking a monthly trends, that these comments are resetting and pushing out. So someone that made a comment a month and a half ago is not going to show up voting anymore, for example. So there are some, we have limited it in person intentionally so that we can have that sort of community type feel.
Beautiful. What is the churn rate amongst passive based on?
So as you saw, there were root causes that were brought up within the right immediately after you answer the question. So immediately after you answer the question, when someone selects that root cause, there's actually a number of detractors that will select certain comments, and we look at the top. We have a defined model threshold that says look at those top. Look at those detractors and the top root causes that they have, and then identify the passives who also have those same root causes as a potential churn risk. Because if a dirty table isn't making them unhappy today, it's certainly long-term going to make them unhappy, for example.
Awesome. And then we have a question from Philip. Is there a culture-specific emphasis with the NPS Plus? That is, the American culture seems a lot more enthusiastic in overt emotion. So basically the question is, do you think this changes based on Australia versus the United States of how people are going to respond to this NPS Plus option?
Well, I think that was one of the driving forces with us putting those, shall I say, scoring indicators below the question. When you do the survey, we want them to know if they're giving a good score, a bad score, not necessarily tagging them and saying, hey, you are a passive with this score, but being able to say, would you recommend us? And that comment coming up maybe when you hover over, say, 7 or 8. It's intentional to try and remove some of the cultural bias that can happen. Now, that won't change everything. There'll still be, say, country to country cultural bias, but within a location, being able to help push the user along, push the respondent along, really was the goal of having those in there.
And there's an interesting angle to it that, for example, passive scores in Australia could be seen as positive versus a possible detractor, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting stuff. One more. I think we have one more question. Give me 1 second. There are obviously people that are asking whether does it have to be 11-point scale? Can they change it? Is that flexibility up for companies to decide? What do you recommend?
I recommend the 11-point scale. We do have some within our NPS options. There are some options for different scales, but for NPS Plus, we definitely recommend the 11-point scale, mostly because you can help discern some of the noise in between the levels. Oftentimes, I've worked with firms that push that. It's got to be a 5-point scale, but it really limits how you can dissect the information, and then because of the churn risk computation, it really is important to have that 11-point scale.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we have for the CX session. Thank you again for the time. Thank you for staying up late and helping us through this.
Absolutely, anytime, and aloha.